Hi, my name is Bill Vining. I'm the CEO of Heartbridge Collective. I wanted to say thank you for taking a look at our elementary curriculum and starting your journey on social emotional learning in the elementary. Today, I've brought a treat for you. It is Jen Williams, who is a curriculum writer, and she has written the curriculum for Heartbridge Learning Center. She will be explaining some things a little bit more than the curriculum. So this is a treat for you. We are also making this available for you as each individual teacher so that you can review this over and over and over however many times you need to. But again, thank you. And as always, however we can help, please let us know. And here's Jen. Thank you.
I'm Jen Williams, and I'm going to be walking through with Carrie today. She's an elementary teacher today. We're looking at the Heartbridge curriculum packets for primary and elementary grade students. Thanks for meeting with me today.
You're welcome.
So as you're looking at the materials provided, there are three main components, and I'm just going to walk through them with her very informally, so you can get a sense of what the materials are and where to start and kind of how to work through that program. So without further ado, Carrie, hello.
Hi.
So when you look at the program, the very first thing that you'll see in the curriculum is the general information. That general information includes the curriculum manual. That curriculum manual is kind of the umbrella for both the primary and the elementary grades. It's kind of the program facets that carry over into both sections, if you will. What we decided, or what I really started to understand as I was pulling this material together, is that we can teach kids all day long social emotional principles, but until we understand it ourselves, there's going to be a disconnect that can't be bridged. So in order to bridge that gap, we have to collectively get our hearts in order and our minds socially, emotionally driven, and kind of change the filter by which we're seeing children's behaviors and understand the catalyst for those behaviors. And is it really a behavior thing? Is it a trauma response thing? Is it coming from some need that they have that they just don't know how to express? And if we can really unpack and understand what's happening there, we can better gauge our response. So you'll see a lot of these facets and program elements come from reframing our response. So the biggest part of that is what the program calls the anchor points. And there are 10 of them. And they are principles to live by. I tried to make them easy to remember phrases that you could just kind of interject into your own thinking and into your own classroom every day, so that that common language can be developed and kids can start to hear the same things over and over again. And that they would understand, okay, when she says this, this is what she means. And when I say this, I know what I mean and everybody else knows what I mean. So it's a way for me to communicate. So the curriculum manual, we'll go back to that. You'll see, again, it just has the introduction. It has a little bit of a backstory and a history there. And it talks about some of the assessment pieces, which you may or may not be taking advantage of. You don't have to do the assessment piece for the program to be successful or to have success with the program. And then it's just a matter of how you want to maneuver it and do a pre or post. But I think what you'll find is pretty organically, you'll see the difference in the way the students interact with you and the way they interact with each other. Because they're going to be given that common language that they can use, that it's not left for, it's not open to interpretation. You're going to get rid of that. That's not what you meant when you said that, or I didn't get what you meant, because we do understand. We all speak that same thing. So this curriculum guide will show you kind of the scope and sequence and how to implement that. The primary and the elementary are different in that they all cover the 5 main parts of social emotional learning, right? There's your relationship skills, your self-awareness, your self-management, your social awareness, your connection. Those are all, like, each of those are covered in both. It's just kind of the order that you start varies. Okay. Younger kids need more help with self-regulation, and that self-awareness isn't really developmentally appropriate for them, right? Older kids, that self-awareness really has to come before they can understand how that affects their relationships with others. So they're both available in both of those. It's just how you use it. So each program has something called educator connections, family connections, and interventions. Again, I told you that this was kind of a top down. You're going from the teachers down and trickling down into the students. So what you have is this educator connection part that really shows you as an educator some hands-on strategies that you can do to reflect, think about maybe what biases you're bringing to the table, what your understandings are challenging, what your understanding is, and seeing if you need to realign something to make that program work. The family connection, think of that as like the go back and forth book that maybe some teachers have. This is what we learned today, and this is how you can extend your learning in the home. Because we understand that social emotional skills look different in school than they do in the home. Just like we behave differently than we do at work and at home. So it kind of gives the kids the freedom to practice in a way that isn't as rigid as some of the other programs that are out there, because it's not going to look the same at home. So that's just a way for families to challenge their thinking, to grow a little bit, and to help their students be successful with what they're learning by, again, adopting that common language and really making it mesh no matter where you are. That's the kind of the cool thing about the anchor points is they can be used in any setting. And it's once you understand it, you can even explain it easily to other people. So that's the educator connection and the family connection. The interventions are, so outside of the skills that are included with the curriculum, the interventions are really more intense, intentional pieces that, let's say you've already covered self-awareness, but then you have a new student come in. You might need to just pull and have this one intervention for them. Or maybe you've had a specific incident between two students and you've already covered this material, but you need to have this intervention. It's just what it says. It's just little interjections that can be kind of done out of sequence to address a specific need. Okay. And then again, the anchor points are there, and we'll go through those today. So your curriculum guide is kind of your curriculum manual is kind of your owner's manual, if you will. It helps you kind of again, just get that broad overview. A lot of that you'll see repeated in the manuals for primary and elementary. That's just because if it's purchased separately, I wanted educators to have access to those things. So let's take a look at the anchor point posters. This is what the children see. These are posters that are available to hang. It's that main phrase, that catchphrase, if you will, with a poem or a kid-friendly explanation. Now, the anchor points you'll see as we go through are explained at an educator level, but this is so we can really make sense of what they are. For self-awareness, the idea, there's two for each one. So for self-awareness, it's what's your number? And you'll see the little poem. It says, cool as a cucumber, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to learn when my number is low. Hot under the collar, I'm mad as a hen. I'm not my best self when my number is 10. Understanding that anytime you walk into a room, just kind of starting that with, hey, what's your number? Where are you? Are you ready to learn right now? And if not, what do you need to do to get there?
That's good.
And because it's okay to be mad, it's how we choose to express it. Like, I can't take that anger away from you, but I can teach you a right way to express that. So the other self-awareness is you break it, you fix it. It's that ownership that things are going to go sideways and things are going to go wrong. That's social emotional learning isn't meant to be that catch-all, cure-all, we're never going to have problems again. And I think that's where so many people feel like they've failed. Like, I've done all these interventions, I've done all these programs, and we're still having problems. You're going to. We're human. And especially with kids, it's so dynamic. Day to day, things change. So you break it, you fix it. Again, it's that ownership. And it just says, sometimes I'm sorry, sometimes I'm not, but I still have to fix the problems I've got. So when conflict happens, I'll try not to fight. Instead, I'll ask, how can I make it right? That happened. Oops. What do we do now? We say in our house, sometimes we say, life's messy, clean it up. Like, it's going to go sideways. Just be prepared. And when it does, how do we move on from there? So those are the two for self-awareness. The anchor points for self-management, the first one, which is the key one, and you'll hear It used a lot. In fact, I use this almost daily, is respond, don't react. We are a very reactive society, right? We have that social media driven instant gratification reaction culture. This says, wait, just stop, breathe, think, and respond before you react. So responses are words that are calm, cool, collected. Reactions are messy and never expected. Teaching kids to see that difference. And it's like, wait, was that a response or a reaction? And then helping them kind of manage that and what that looks like. The other self-management is control your emotions. Don't let them control you. When my feelings run hot, I can still choose to thrive. I'll take deep, calming breaths as I count up to 5. Like, okay, you're starting to, you can see it, and that's part of that self-awareness and that self-management of when I get mad, this is what it looks like. Some of the lessons help them identify where they feel it in their body and to help them really bring to the forefront of their minds that, again, we're not trying to keep you from getting mad, but when you do, how are you going to respond to it, and how are you going to own it and be in control of it? Okay. So for social awareness, the first one is evasive maneuvers. Everybody knows evasive maneuvers. Feet firmly planted, I feel solid ground. I'll plan my next move before jumping around. Right? We have this idea of, through the lessons of plan, do, review. It's one thing to plan it. It's another thing to do it. I think the piece that's missing for a lot of components is that review. What worked? What didn't work? Just because you made that plan and the curriculum says to do A and then B, if it doesn't work, don't do A and B again. That's the definition of insanity, right? So helping them plan that move and then debrief on what worked and what didn't work and be able to take those evasive maneuvers. The next one is heart check. That's a big piece as well. That's repeated almost as much as respond, don't react. It's not just what I say, but how I say it. My face and body must speak kindly too. So if a child is starting to have a reaction, just as simple as just looking at them and going like this, heart check. And that's that nonverbal cue that says, I can see that you're gearing up. And that's not I can see you're doing something wrong, because we want to validate their feelings. It's just hey, be aware. You're starting to get upset. And it helps them then unpack and walk through that. Okay. The relationship skills. Friendship is optional. Respect is required. We're in that, Insta, follow me. Everybody wants to be a fan. I have followers. We're not all going to like each other. We're not all supposed to be best friends, but we do have to respect each other, especially in a communal classroom of learners, right? Even when we don't get along on this rule, we all can agree. I'll speak with respect when I talk to you, and you'll do the same for me. In this safe space of this classroom, these are the ground rules that we've all agreed to. And that can carry over on the playground, on the bus, and at home. And it may look different in each of those places, but the bottom line is the same. We're going to have a certain level of respect for each other. That doesn't mean that we're friendships, and it honestly doesn't mean that I even have to like that person, but we can be respectful. And then that carries over and teaches them in some of the elementary levels going up into middle school what that looks like to have those professional relationships, and helps them plan then for jobs and college and things like that. Relationship skills, that second one is pride ride. Sometimes I'm too proud to admit I was wrong or that mistakes came from me. I'll remember now I'm always strong when I make a sincere apology. I don't want to look weak. I didn't want to say I'm sorry. Well, that's actually the harder thing to do, and that shows that you have strength. So along with like heart check, it's like, hey, are you on a pride ride right now? It might be really hard for you to admit that you've done something wrong, but that might be the case, and how can we make it right? Responsible decision making. It says that there are only bad choices, not bad kids. This is a big part of the Heartbridge curriculum as a whole, and you'll see the poem in both the curriculum manual and the 2 elementary and primary modules that say my failures don't define me, and that my mistakes are not my name. I can make good choices filled with courage instead of shame. That those things that have happened, but they don't define you. Now, we do talk about the difference between choices and mistakes, and how we're not allowing that perpetuating of bad choices. This is not a wipe the slate clean and every day you get to be a naughty kid because, I'm a victim. That's not what this is about. This is about separating them from that, in fact, and saying, no, you're not a victim. You have control. and you get to make the positive choices that are going to move you forward. And then the last one is realistic reset. Climbers anchor in many times in tough spots to restart safely when they fall away. I'll need that too as I learn what to do, several chances or more in one day. I remember going to a school once and seeing a preschool where they had 4 boxes and they got a smiley face at breakfast, one at lunch, one at nap time, and one at the end of the day, if they followed the rules and did everything just right. If at any point that child started to deviate or needed something or was starting to become higher maintenance or bad, the threat then was, you don't want a frowny face on your, and they only had those 4 chances, right? That's not enough for a child whose main brain focus is 5 minutes at most, right? Yeah. So to have those realistic resets and say, man, that just happened, that went sideways, that was awful, but you've done that, restorative justice, you've helped make it right, you can move on. Like, it's okay to just reset and not be burdened by the mistakes that you made last year, last month, last week, 10 minutes ago. To have that freedom to go, okay, I'm going to reset and move forward and have that future, that post-traumatic growth that we talk about so much in the curriculum, right? So those anchor points, I know there's a lot of words there, but if you have just those 10 things and really even those 5, 1 from each, and you can pick, that's the nice thing about the curriculum is, your students, you can see which ones they respond to the most, and you can pick those that they respond to more. And like I said, the ones that tend to come out most in my everyday life are the respond, don't react, and the heart check. Those are powerful. And somehow even just using those 2 kind of refreshes everybody's memory of the others, and they're just always there, right? It's a tool in your toolbox. So those are the anchor points, the kid-friendly version. There are those posters. The curriculum also includes the certificates of recognition. So the certificates of recognition are those gotcha being good things, because we want that so much. It's just to show at those times when they demonstrated that. And that's really just, we label directions, we label measurements of distance. This is another measurement, like, hey, I'm labeling this so that you can say, not only this is what it looks like when you're bad, but this is what it looks like when you're good, and go for more of that. Okay, any questions so far? I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
Good.
Okay.
Really great information.
Great. So there's the overview of everything. Let's dive into, let's look at the elementary first, the intermediate module. That intermediate module was written for 3rd and 4th grade, but again, those concepts can be used really even with adults. And like I said, it is meant for us as teachers and parents and individuals to kind of absorb it first and then model that, because we know that kids learn by modeling and by watching us model. So if we can implement these things, it'll come organically. So the instructor guide is available there. Again, that's that overview of everything. You'll be familiar with it because you've already kind of seen that through the curriculum guide. There's the overview of all of the standards that remind you what the social emotional standards are. And then there's the interventions that we talked about, the educator connections and the family connections. There are 5 for each. If you, it's designed so that you can spend as much or as little time as you want on each of those. Again, your students best. If your school sets it up to that where January is self-awareness, then you have that one key. They're all literacy based. So there are books that are connected for each one. So you can run with that for the month. You can take a week to do that. You can do it in a day and just be done. They're all meant to just kind of be cyclical and come back. It's not something that, like, once you've done it, you can't revisit it again. Because as you know, what self-awareness looks like in October is going to be very different than what it looks like in May, because the dynamics are different. Right? And they've learned and deepened their relationships with each other. So you can come back to one as much as you want. But they are kind of meant just to kind of follow a timeline, that, again, given that timeline of which part you do first. So maybe self-management, followed by self-awareness, followed by responsible decision-making in this case, because in 3rd and 4th grade, we want them to really start they're already thinking about other people. Developmentally, they are very justice driven. They're very about organization and structure. They are very aware of what's happening socially around them. So we want them to have that self-management piece first and foremost. And then we want that responsible decision making to come. And then we want, having that built, we want them to work on their social interactions, right? So you just kind of run it that way. But let's say you get in the classroom and you go, wow, these kids have no self-awareness. There's nothing in there that says you have to follow those, right? You have the freedom to go however you want. So let's take a look at let's take a little closer look at one of these educator connections, so you kind of understand what I mean as far as how it's meant to maybe challenge you or make you think a little bit about what you bring to the table and what you bring to your kids. So and there's one for each of those 5 areas, right? For self-awareness, we're wanting to develop a deeper learning. Just talks about a little bit, in this case, deeper learning generally refers to the skills, dispositions, and mindsets positively associated with academic success. So we're talking about what we need to do to develop deeper learning in order to bring these skills to our kiddos. So here are some questions that create a strong sense of community and learners who value intellectual engagement with others. So it gives you the kind of the overview, the introduction. It gives you an action step. So this action step says to seek opportunities to involve students meaningfully and watch their self-esteem and self-efficacy increase. And then how we do that, there's more strategies, and it's broken down. So there's a little blurb, and then an action step, a blurb, an action step, and then some strategies for what that looks like. Okay, so these are just things that we can do as educators, that you can do with your staff to just really kind of develop deeper learning in yourself. Because again, if you have that as an open source that you're modeling, your students will see that as well. Okay. Again, there's one of those for each of the 5 parts of social emotional learning. So self-management, it's the introduction of SMART goals. Have you used a SMART goal before?
We have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is just another introduction to that. So SMART is the acronym for specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-bound. So it helps you make sure that your goals for yourself, for your classroom, are operating under that SMART goal system, because then your students are going to be doing the same thing, and you're not setting them up for failure, right? So we're going through all of these things. There's that bias I told you about in the social awareness. There's a video there to check your bias at the door, if you will. And then, so when you have the virtual information, there's a link that will work, or there's the tiny URL that you can copy and paste to get to that information. Okay, so again, this is all things that I can do self-reflectively, or that you can do self-reflectively as an educator. For relationship skills, it's learning your apology language, so that when your students are interacting with you, you can understand why is it easier for me to, like Becky came up to me and said something, and I was able to let it go. I couldn't let Tyrone's go. Why? Is it something that they said? Is it something I need? And to be able to recognize that. And then again, discovering your decision-making style. We have different decision-making styles. If my decision-making style is different than yours, I might see yours as lesser, and it's not. It's just different. Same thing. Even I want, as an educator, I want to model and teach my students to do things a certain way. But if they're not able to do that way, or if they're not successful, it's my duty to make sure that I'm giving them all of those. So if they have a different style, that could be a potential for a conflict. So I have to make sure that conflict, I have the opportunity to make sure that conflict is not as my doing, right? So any questions on the educator part there?
No,
okay.
Good.
That's all yours to do. You can do that all ahead of time. You can do that as you go through. I have always been a proponent of letting students know that I'm learning right alongside with them. And that even if I've learned something, how it plays out in the classroom is different every day.
Right.
So I'm open to, we change the wording from frustration to fascination. So if you can change that with your students as well, you can have that real open, honest dialogue with them and say, I'm really frustrated by what I'm seeing right now, or I'm really fascinated by what I'm seeing right now. Is it something that you're doing? Is it something that I'm doing? Or is it a combination of the two? So those are kind of meant for you to do on you. Here's the family connections. That's that piece I said that is meant to be taken to the family. It explains kind of a little bit about the social emotional target. It may explain the anchor points more, and then it has an opportunity or an action for them to do to practice those skills. So for self-awareness, here's one, for example, it's called the Family Summit. And it's a process by which families get to sit down and then it's real and kind of go through this summit process of creating a problem or a question and then solving that together. And so it has the blurb, like I said, and then action steps. It takes it very step by step for them to make it very simple and easy. None of them require materials or things that the families wouldn't have. I don't want that to be a barrier. And if there was, then there's, if we wanted to make a copy for them, then that would be possible too. So there's a handout for this one, and that's it. They're very simple. And again, same thing. It goes through all of the 5 components of social emotional learning. So the families can connect on each of those levels. Okay.
It's very important to have the family piece in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we don't want to alienate them, because what we find is that their home life is such a disconnect from school. And in the past, it has been very hierarchical, and the school system or the institution tells the family how to do it. And that can leave the family disconnected and alienated, because it just doesn't work that way in their family. So how then, the question has always been, how do we balance? Like, I can't always condone what is happening in the family structure. And I do want to educate them and let them know that there's a different way, but I also want to validate them and not make them feel less than. So how do we give this information to the family in a way that's like, hey, you need to do better, right? That's not what this is about. This is, hey, there's some exciting things that we're learning. And I think it might really change the way you interact with your kiddo. And I'll be excited to see if that works for you. Let me know. And if not, tell me why. And we can, and asking them what barriers or what blocks they're having at home. And that's really a two-way street, because if you're seeing a barrier or a block in the classroom, that conversation is then, this is what's happening in the classroom. Does this happen at home? What have you done to be successful? Because we know that parents are the first teachers. What have you done to be successful? How can I implement that to the classroom?
That's good.
And leaving that. And this opens that door. It allows them to do that. So that's the main nutshell. Then there's still, we haven't even gotten to the actual lessons that you do with the kids. So those are in here as well. Those are the skill lessons. And there's, you'll see that each, let me come back to, that's the instructor guide. So the skill lessons then, each of the 5 areas, like self-awareness, self-management, has 5 lessons. So here's self-awareness. And for self-awareness, there are 5 lessons that you can do to bring that point home, okay? There are, again, there's literacy. There's always an anchor point review. And then there's a literacy component as well. Let me get back past the anchor points. And I'll show you what one of the lessons looks like. Each lesson is the same as far as the layout. So when you look at the lesson, you'll see that they'll have the title, the introduction piece, the objective and the standard, vocabulary, any preparation or materials that you need to have. And then it's really scripted, super scripted, word for word, how long it should take for each of those sections. I mean, down to the word, here's what you say, here's what you do, here's what you tell the students to do. Now, do you have to do that? No. Right. I mean, if you have the freedom to own this and look at it and go, yeah, that's not going to work with my kids. I get what she's trying to say here. I'm going to do it this way. That's yours. But then if you're not really sure, you can go right through. So there's a demonstration, and then there's a reflection question. And then there's usually some kind of wrap-up, summary, and then there's an optional extension that I've put on for each one. That may be for the kids that are above or below, or that may be for just an extension, maybe it went quicker than you thought, or if you have more time, you can always go to it, okay? And that's the same for each of the lessons. So you'll see that as a pattern go all the way through. Okay, and then this section, so the assessment, if you're doing that, there's some information there. And then the from now on and the anchor points, each of the lessons ends with now what, right? How do we take this back to the anchor points? And from now on, what good, we've done this, now what? It's not busy work. It's not a coloring sheet to do and just send home to the parents to read about what self-awareness is. This is very much meant to be ingrained and taken into how the child acts every day. So there's always a review there of how students can begin to exercise what they've just learned every day moving forward and how they can revisit it. And it's a great way for you and them to go, hey, remember that lesson that we did? This is what we took away from it. Okay. And so each of those has that component, so you can really start to build and make it something that you see every day. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. So that's really it. There are supplemental materials, and those are written in. You'll see if it calls for a supplemental material, it will be in the preparation of materials section, where it says like the template, for example, or in the appendix, there might be a poster that's required. There might be something else that is necessary. Yes. Okay, so that's a great question. I had a question on how it might be integrated into the day. That's, again, as you as the teacher, if you're going through and you see, hey, I have 45 minutes of time in between my math and my pull-out time.
Right.
Again, this is literacy-based, so you might pull it into your literacy time. Do you guys use PLC for your, at Lakeside, do you have a personal learning for a group where you come up with the themes for? Okay, so maybe if you took it to the PLC and said, I'd like to integrate these lessons.
Right.
Maybe here are the books that they've suggested, or if there are other books, you can find social emotional skills in any kind of book right now, right? So that's kind of, you'll be able to see what book you can assign to that. Plop it into your literacy time. Some of these are science-based. Plop it into your science lesson as you're doing that. It can be a transition piece. Some of the lessons are, they vary from 10 to 45 minutes. Maybe you can do a piece of it as you're transitioning. There's always that, I call it the dead time, when you're waiting to go to specials or waiting to come back. Perfect time to just plop in and say, hey, we've got 20 minutes. Clean off your desk. We're going to just run through a lesson. And your kids, again. So if it's not really going to work to have this formal, okay, it's time to do social emotional learning, you don't have to do that. You can just say, hey, I've got this thing that we're going to do. Have you ever seen what happens if you put food coloring in milk? That they don't have to know it's a social emotional lesson.
Right.
The idea that at the end you've already read through and the summary, the takeaway, and you do this cool thing like, hey, we've got 10 minutes before we go out the door. Check out this pan of milk. What do you think is going to happen if? And you just run with it that way, and you let that social emotional conversation come organically. And the kids are going to start to ask questions, and you can answer it and say, hey, that color looks a lot like me when I'm mad because I spilled my coffee. I just kind of explode all over the place, right? And you can just bring it back into your own experiences. Okay. Are there any other questions? The question is, where do I start? Also a very good question. Where you want to start is by reading through that curriculum manual, that very first thing that I showed you, that's the umbrella to the whole program, because that's going to kind of give you the history and help you understand how it's all tied together. It'll include that scope and sequence, so you kind of get a picture or a vision of where you're going. And then where I would challenge you and any educator that wants to do this to start is to say, what is my scope and sequence? What do I want from my kids? What do I need from my kids? If you're starting this from the very beginning of the year and you don't know your kids, then just go right down the way that it's recommended in the book, which is for this age group, self-awareness, and go that way. Pick a lesson that looks good. Figure out how and where you want to plop it into your day and have fun with it. You don't have to do it every day. The great thing with young kids is repetition. They love to do the same thing over again, especially when it's an object lesson like a lot of these are. I tried to make them very hands-on, something that they would enjoy doing. And then there's that first opportunity of, hey, remember yesterday, or we're going to try something cool today. And then the next day, hey, remember yesterday when we did this? What do we remember? What if we tried it again, but they already have that schema now. Like, let's try it again and see if something different happens. Okay. So just to back up a little bit, you're going to do that curriculum manual for yourself. You're going to look through those educator connections for yourself. Look through some of those parent connections, and as you plan, like if you've already planned that you're going to start with self-awareness and then self-management and then responsible decision-making, let's say, pull those family connections out and figure out how you want to get that information to the family. You've got it digitally. You can email it to them. You can put it on the class website. You've got it to where you can make a copy and put it in their go-home folders if that's something that you use. Figure out if there's any other supplemental material that you want to give to the child or to the family. And then just have fun. Go from there.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions that you have for that? Okay. The assessment piece is so let me ask Bill a question on the assessment piece. That's something that we had done in the past. Again, it's not necessary for the curriculum. There are several different options out there, but assessment wise, really, you just want to be able to track kind of where the kiddos are. There is a great tool that you can use to kind of gauge where your students are on their social, emotional, their relationship skills, and it's like a soundboard, and you can kind of see what needs to be brought up, what needs to be brought down, if you will.
Right.
And that could help you determine where to start as well. So I'll send that over to Bill, and we can talk more about that as well. Okay. And then, I mean, we're available. I'm available. So if there's any questions, or if you come across something, you go, I tried this lesson and I thought it made sense, but it didn't, let me know. I'd be happy to walk through that with you and debrief anything that goes sideways.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this and walk through it, and for being brave to do it.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Sorry.
Would you focus on one for a week or a month? Or...
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Really, it's just a matter of how you see it. How does that fall on the kids?
Mm-hmm.
How are your kids responding to it?
Mm-hmm.
Are the kids understanding it? Think about when you are learning a new skill, how long does it take you to learn it and really start practicing it? How long do you want your kids to? And we're very much in that 36-week, 9-week quarters, we got to move things along kind of mind frame, which is okay in its place, but this isn't just a once and done, check that box. If I need to stay, it's all, just think of it as like a corkscrew. You need to stay with it. And if you need to revisit it, maybe introduce that next lesson, but always come back and revisit that one thing. And like I said, they're meant to just be built on, and you can revisit and add on and extend as much as needed. And I know that we were talking about self-awareness last week. We're still there, but did you know that self-awareness can also help your self-management? And you're using those terms and you're introducing those ideas, and there's a vocabulary sheet in here because we need kids to have that language. It used to be that social emotional learning was kind of a hidden language, and we had to teach the kids without really teaching them. And that's not, we don't say we're going to teach kids directions, but we're not going to use the word north or south. This is like we're going to do it. That's a wall, that's a table, that's a chair, that's a floor. You can sit on the floor. But we have these things called chairs. They make it more comfortable. And there's also a couch, which is like super cozy, right? There's nothing wrong with either of those. It's just there's a level of comfort with each of those. It's the same with social emotional skills. It's not that there's something wrong with only having self-awareness, but when you use self-awareness and self-management, it's kind of like that chair. It's a different level. And when you use self-awareness to help your self-management to drive your relationship skills, that's like the easy chair of social emotional. You're in cozy land, right? So to help them understand how they can work together.
Okay, I want you to address this. So don't put me on this, okay? By the way,
We're recording?
Yeah. So here's the.
No.
No, I'm not saying that because that who cares? So can you address best practices? Because even since we talked and we started all our little stuff about best practices, everybody's into best practices. Well, what goes on in Springdale is not what's good necessarily with Lakeside.
Absolutely.
And so it's your uniqueness is what is going to bring out what your uniqueness as a teacher, uniqueness as a blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So let's talk for a second about best practices with social emotional learning and programs and how you might implement those things. You as an educator are probably very aware of standards and how those trickle down, and how there are national standards, there are state standards, there are standards for each school district, and how those are implemented and what that looks like. There is a national ideal of best practice for social emotional learning. It's coming to the state level, and it is coming to district by district, and it's got that same trickle down that's coming through, and people are starting to understand best practices as it relates to social emotional learning. My challenge to you as an educator and to any educator is to say, what do I know about my students, about their families, about my district, about my region, and what do I need to know in the terms of social emotional learning? Because what we may implement here in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and how we do that will look very different than somebody implementing this in downtown St. Louis or Sacramento. Regionally, it's different. The population, the demographics, the socio-emotional or the socioeconomic status, any and all of those things will change both how something is received and how something is taught. So yes, the standards are there and the best practice of how those are implemented. We're going back to, is it a 45-minute lesson done once a day, every day? Is it once a week? I challenge you as an educator to really know yourself and know the limitations and the extraordinary abilities of your students, and run with that. We talk about bias, and you've heard me mention that before, typically as a bad thing, but that's not always a bad thing. We each have this built-in knowledge and background that we bring, and that can be very beneficial and helpful to you. So what knowledge do you already have of these kiddos? What knowledge do you have of their families, of what the community is going through? COVID has ravaged a lot of our families and communities, and what do we need to know and be aware of that? What do we need to know? If I were back in Colorado, wildfire is a huge thing. Our community has been ravaged by wildfire and drought. I might focus on social and relational things more than self-awareness. Maybe there was, God forbid, an awful incident where there was something that rocked a community. Self-awareness might be a painful place to camp, and I might want to avoid that for a minute and work on something socially. So best practice is great, but you also should and could and have that right to use the knowledge that you have to work within that framework. All of this has been written with best practice in mind. So yes, the best practices are there. The standards are incorporated and written. The scope and sequence is there. You've got developmental milestones and what is appropriate for kids of this age. So that's all laid out for you. And then now that those boundaries, that fence has been built, feel free to move about the cabin and run anywhere you want within that.
What you've actually done is not done this with best practices in mind. You've done this with evidence-based in mind.
Evidence-based, yeah. It's kind of a reverse engineering, if you will.
Well, the reason I say that is sometimes just Carol Sanford would say that best practices is one of the things that kills.
It is.
Uniqueness and kills.
It does. Yeah. Best practices doesn't always allow for the best reality and what we know. I think it kind of robs our students sometimes of the uniqueness that they bring to it.
Yeah. And this is not a program for a program. It's
Right.
a program for it's a program to bring out the uniquenesses in the teacher and the
student. So it'll
students.
absolutely. So this program, it brings out the uniqueness of the students and the teacher, but really what it does, those unique qualities are already there. The reason we have social emotional learning is because that uniqueness is already there. What we found is people don't know how to interact with that unique. My uniqueness is blinding your uniqueness, and we have to
bring it to the table.
Right. And we don't know how to make that work in the scope of authority, and submission to authority and what, and so it kind of levels that playing field and equalizes it to where I'm going to show you how to make that uniqueness shine in a way that works in society, because I want you to shine. I'm not trying to take it away from you. I'm just showing you that there are right and wrong ways and better ways to make it work. Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to show you the anchor points in the adult language. Okay, so here for each of those, your battery's running low. For each of those standards, right here's the objectives. So for self-awareness, the objective A is that student demonstrates an awareness of personal traits and that they demonstrate a sense of personal responsibility and seek help from external supports when needed. So the adult language for the anchor point is what's your number. So in the medical field, doctors and nurses use the numeric scale to ask. So it just gives that blurb, right? Each of these then has a teaching point and an implementation strategy. So the teaching point for what's your number is that educators should help students develop awareness of how their feelings affect behavior by connecting their number to the behaviors being exhibited. Wow, you just knocked Tommy off of his chair. I bet you're feeling like a 10 right now. I can tell that just by what I saw, rather than reacting to the, I can't believe you just knocked Tommy off his chair. Pick him back up and go to the corner. You know, like we have to embrace that failure and use that as a modeling and self-talk that same way, just like you would if you're riding a bike. Or learning to walk. When a toddler is learning to walk and they fall or they trip on something, you don't go, I can't believe you just tripped over that block. Get back up and start. Why would you trip over that block? What were you thinking? Well, him knocking Tommy off that chair is him stumbling through toddler style through his social emotional stuff. And it's an opportunity for that self-awareness to go, okay, let's just unpack what just happened there. This is what I noticed. And you'll see a lot of that in as you read through. It's about noticing and using that language with the kids. Not what you liked or what you disliked, because it doesn't matter what we like or dislike. It's just noticing. I noticed you just knocked Tommy off his chair. It doesn't matter why. So that doesn't even a question that we ask, right? I can tell that you're probably not feeling your best self right now. Tell me what you're feeling right now. Are you mad? Are you sad? Are you happy? And then just kind of help them unpack that. Obviously, if a child is mad and they're in the process of having them come apart, that's not the time to self-reflect and go through that. You pick up what you do.
You gotta teach it.
Yeah, and that's in there as well. You teach it before you do it. You say, wow, knocking Tommy off of his chair is not an option when somebody is upset. We're going to help Tommy get back up onto his chair. And then when you've cooled off, we'll talk a little bit about what just happened. And then you unpack it from there. So students should be given ample opportunities to check in. So again, that student knocking Tommy off his chair is an opportunity where if we had done the lesson about emotional temperature, or if we had done the lesson of self-awareness where students are encouraged to recognize in their body when they get mad, and if you had done the educator connection that says, I'm going to understand where all of my students feel emotion, because Tommy's a hitter, and I know that when he starts pulling things with his hands, he's fixing to have a come apart and he's going to pop somebody in the eye. So if I see Tommy's hands doing this, like there's a certain amount of accountability on our part to follow through and see things. We can't just put it on the students and say, Tommy's just a hitter. He's going to hit kids. No, I have to notice and say, Tommy's hands are awfully busy. I bet he's not feeling, he's getting up there. I can pull Tommy aside and go, hey, I noticed that your hands you're clenching your fists. Are you doing okay? How you feeling right now? What's your number?
Right.
And then Tommy can say, yeah, I was actually really mad because of what happened at recess. And that's an opportunity there. It's also just a self-awareness that even if you say, hey, I noticed that you're clenching your fists. If you're not okay, maybe go take a break, because I can see that you might be getting upset. And he might not have even been aware of it. But what you know is that he was at an 8, and it normally doesn't take much for him to be a trigger anyway. And then when a little boy in the chair said something, he's gone. But by you interjecting and going, hey, I see your hands are moving, he can come back down a notch.
Yeah.
And I don't have to, I didn't have to break up any fight. I didn't have to do anything. So just being aware of that. Maybe Lizette is the girl in your classroom who's always sick. Her stomach always hurts. because she's feeling anxiety in her stomach. So the next time she comes to you with an upset stomach, it's like, hey, tell me about how your morning was. What's happening? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or you start to see her kind of rock, and whatever it is, because you've already run through that lesson that helps you identify physically where kids are feeling what they're feeling. Then you mirror that back to them. I notice when you start kicking on the chair that it's because you are not feeling certain about something.
Right.
What can I do to help you right now? And then they, I'm sorry, did I just kick you? And then they see, like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even know I did that.
Right.
Well, I noticed that. And they're seeing.